The year 1876 brings thunder across the Great Plains, and I want you to picture this. Morning mist rising from the Yellowstone River, where Sioux and Crow warriors have been killing each other for 3 generations. Not 3 years. 3 generations. Your grandfather killed my grandfather, my father killed your father, and now we're continuing the cycle. In a Sioux camp along the Powder River, women wake before dawn to prepare wasna, that mixture of dried meat and berries that could keep a warrior alive for weeks. Just 50 miles north, their enemies, the Crow, tend sacred tobacco gardens, following rituals so old nobody remembers when they started. Both peoples are doing the same thing, really, living their lives, following their customs, absolutely convinced the other side deserves to die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if these history tales fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now here's where it gets interesting. This story opens 6 weeks after Little Bighorn, where George Armstrong Custer and over 200 soldiers died in what Americans called a massacre and the Sioux called a battle. The Crow had been there too, as scouts for the army, watching their white allies fall like grass before a scythe. Think about that position for a moment. You're Crow, you've been fighting the Sioux since your grandfather's time, and suddenly these white soldiers show up, offering you $30 a month, which is more than most enlisted men earn just to track your ancient enemies. It's the deal of a lifetime, except your allies just got destroyed. And now the army's desperate, paranoid, and looking for anyone willing to hunt Sioux. Into this poisoned atmosphere steps a man named Red Hawk. He's a Sioux warrior carrying 43 coup feathers, each one representing an act of bravery in battle. 43. He's survived 17 winters of fighting whites, which means he started when he was probably 14 or 15 years old. This isn't some young hothead. This is a man who's seen enough death to fill a cemetery, and he's watching his people get pushed further and further into corners. During a vision quest on Bear Butte, one of those sacred mountains where warriors go to speak with the spirits and figure out their purpose, Red Hawk conceived something that should be impossible. A plan so audacious, so contrary to every rule of honor his people hold sacred, that even thinking about it feels like betrayal. He calls a council. Not the full tribal council, but a secret gathering in a lodge where only the most trusted warriors can hear what he's proposing. Picture that scene, smoke from the fire, the smell of sage and tobacco, men who've bled together sitting in a circle, and Red Hawk explaining that he wants to infiltrate the Crow Scouts at Fort Ellis, not as prisoners, not as traders, as Crow warriors, living among them, eating with them, reporting for duty alongside them, while feeding intelligence back to the Sioux. It's the kind of plan that makes everyone in the room simultaneously think it's genius and insane. The selection process becomes brutal. Red Hawk needs warriors with specific skills that rarely exist in one person. They need to speak fluent Crow, understand military procedures, memorize complex information, and possess the psychological strength to lie every moment of every day while surrounded by enemies who will torture them to death if discovered. 5 men emerge from the trials. Swift Arrow speaks fluent Crow because he spent 2 childhood years as a captive after a raid, living with a Crow family who treated him well enough that he learned their language like a native speaker. Broken Wing knows their sign language from years of trading expeditions, those uneasy gatherings where enemies meet under truce flags to exchange goods. White Magpie can imitate the Crow accent perfectly, capturing those subtle differences in pronunciation that separate mountain people from plains people. Running Elk understands military structure because he spent 3 years imprisoned at Fort Robinson, watching how soldiers think, how they organize, how they follow orders. Silent Thunder, well, his gift is patience and memory, like those winter counts painted on buffalo hide, where entire years of history get compressed into single images. Now comes the transformation, and this is where the story gets almost unbearably tense. These 5 warriors have to surrender everything that makes them who they are. Their medicine bundles, those sacred objects that connect them to their spiritual power. Their eagle feathers earned through years of bravery. Their sacred pipes carved by grandfathers and passed down through generations. Imagine being asked to give up your identity, your connection to your ancestors, your very soul, and do it willingly because the mission requires it. They dress in captured crow clothing that still carries what they call the ghost smell of enemies. That particular scent of smoke and herbs and tanned leather that's slightly different from their own people's. They learn to walk differently because Crow warriors who live in mountains have a different gait than Sioux who run across open plains. They practice eating with the three-finger method of Crow warriors instead of the four-finger way of their people, which sounds like a tiny detail until you realize that anyone watching you eat can tell where you're from by how you hold your food. For 20 days, they live in complete isolation from their families. 20 days speaking only Crow, thinking only Crow thoughts, practicing Crow mannerisms until they become automatic. They paint their faces with the forked designs of the enemy, transforming themselves so completely that their own mothers, if they passed them in a camp, wouldn't recognize their transformed sons. It's psychological warfare turned inward, and you have to wonder what it does to a man's mind to deliberately erase himself, to become the enemy so thoroughly that the line between performance and reality starts to blur. And here's the hook that should terrify you. It worked. 5 Sioux warriors walked into Fort Ellis, presented themselves as Crow scouts, and nobody suspected a thing. They were surrounded by 200 soldiers and 60 genuine Crow scouts, any one of whom could expose them with a single question, a single suspicious glance, a single cultural detail they got wrong. But they pulled it off. Now they're living inside the enemy's headquarters, sleeping in the same barracks as warriors who would gladly take their scalps, reporting for duty every morning to officers who trust them with intelligence that could save or destroy hundreds of lives. The infiltration is complete, and the real nightmare is about to begin. Fort Ellis sits in the Yellowstone Valley with 200 soldiers garrisoning what amounts to a forward operating base in hostile territory. And somewhere inside this fort, 5 Sioux warriors are waking up every morning, getting dressed in enemy clothing and trying not to get themselves killed. Think about the sheer psychological weight of that existence. You're living a lie 24 hours a day, surrounded by people who speak your adopted language, who know the culture you're faking, and who would execute you without trial if they discovered the truth. This isn't a spy novel where the hero infiltrates for 3 days and gets out. This is week after week of constant performance, and one mistake means death. The daily challenge begins with something as simple as morning roll call. Swift Arrow has to respond to his false name, Black Wolf, in perfect Crow dialect while standing in formation beside genuine Crow scouts. These aren't strangers. These are men who've been Crow their entire lives, who can spot a fake the way you might notice someone wearing shoes on the wrong feet. And they're noticing things, subconsciously at first. One genuine scout looks down at Swift Arrow's moccasins and something bothers him, something he can't quite articulate, because the beading pattern is from the wrong river valley. It's like meeting someone who claims to be from your hometown, but pronounces the street names slightly wrong. Your brain registers it even if you don't consciously realize what's happening. The psychological torture compounds during meals. And this is the kind of detail that makes you realize how deep the deception goes. These 5 infiltrators force down salt pork that makes their stomachs revolt. Their people don't eat like this. The Sioux diet is buffalo, wild game, berries, roots, things that taste like the prairie smells. But here they are, pretending to enjoy coffee sweetened with white sugar instead of wild honey, eating hardtack that could break your teeth, acting like this is normal food while their bodies are literally rejecting it. White Magpie loses 12 pounds in the first month. Running Elk develops stomach problems that never quite go away, but they keep eating, keep smiling, keep playing the role. Now let's talk about the intelligence network, because this is where the operation becomes genuinely sophisticated. Information flows like water finding cracks through multiple channels that can't all be closed at once. Swift Arrow leaves marked stones at specific landmarks during patrols. Not obvious marks, A stone turned a certain way, placed at a certain distance from a tree, visible only if you know exactly what you're looking for. A mixed-blood trader named Joseph Broken Hand, who plays both sides for profit and probably sleeps just fine at night, carries messages hidden in tobacco bundles. He's the kind of man who exists in every war, loyal only to money, which makes him predictable in his own way. And then there's the brilliant part. Information passes through children's games. Picture this: Sioux boys playing with Crow boys near the fort, the way kids do everywhere, trading toys and playing warrior games. Except those toys contain maps drawn on thin bark. A small carved horse might have a tiny strip of bark inside, showing where ammunition is stored. A beaded ball might contain information about patrol schedules. The soldiers see children playing and think nothing of it because who suspects children? It's elegant and ruthless, and probably saved dozens of lives. The 5 spies systematically catalogue every detail that matters. Lieutenant Morrison keeps ammunition in the southeast storage building, which matters because if you know where the ammunition is, you know where to strike. Captain Hayes drinks heavily every Tuesday, which matters because a drunk officer makes mistakes. The garrison receives supplies on the 3rd Thursday of each month, which matters because supply wagons are vulnerable. 22 guards patrol at night, but only 14 stay awake, which matters because the difference between 22 and 14 is the difference between a defended fort and a target. Every detail gets noted, memorized, and passed through the network. These men are living computers in an age before computers, storing tactical information that's worth hundreds of lives. Then comes the masterpiece. White Magpie is delivering firewood to Colonel Brennan's tent, playing the role of the helpful scout, being invisible the way servants are always invisible to people in power. And while he's stacking wood, he sees papers on the colonel's desk. Deployment orders. Not just any orders, but the kind of strategic intelligence that can change the course of a campaign. 3 columns of 600 soldiers each will march north in September. 1,800 soldiers in total, moving in a coordinated campaign designed to crush Sioux resistance. This single piece of information is worth more than every other thing the infiltrators have learned, combined. The information travels through the network and reaches Red Hawk within 4 days. 4 days from inside a military fort to a Sioux war chief's hands. That's faster than official military communication in some cases. Red Hawk calls his war council, and they plan an ambush at Willow Creek that becomes a textbook example of how to use intelligence. 2 companies of cavalry, roughly 130 men, ride into a box canyon, following their trusted Crow guides. Trusted. That's the word that matters here. These soldiers have been on patrol with these guides for weeks. They've shared coffee and stories. They trust them with their lives, and that trust is about to kill them. The ambush unfolds with devastating precision. The cavalry enters the canyon with their guides in front, and everything seems normal until suddenly it isn't. Warriors appear on both rims of the canyon like they've materialized from stone. The crossfire begins, and it's not a battle, it's a slaughter. 130 soldiers die in 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Some of them never even get their rifles up. The false scouts disappear during the chaos, like smoke in wind. And here's the coldest part of the whole operation. They return to Fort Ellis 3 days later with practiced tales of narrow escape and Sioux treachery. Imagine that moment. They walk back into the fort, exhausted, traumatized, telling stories about how the Sioux attacked without warning, how they barely escaped with their lives, how they tried to warn the soldiers, but everything happened too fast. And everyone believes them because why wouldn't you believe your own scouts? Swift Arrow probably has real tears in his eyes when he describes watching good men die. And maybe some of those tears are even genuine, because killing 130 men isn't something that leaves you untouched, even if they're your enemy. The false scouts receive sympathy, better rations, respect for their bravery and survival. And all the while they're gathering more intelligence, preparing for the next operation, living the lie so deep that they probably have nightmares about being discovered. But here's what they don't know. What they can't know, because they're so focused on maintaining their cover, someone is watching them. Someone who's been keeping notes, tracking patterns, building a case. Captain James Mackenzie has 17 scars from the Civil War and eyes that miss nothing. And he's starting to notice that certain patrols, the ones guided by certain scouts, have a casualty rate that doesn't make statistical sense. And he's about to set a trap that will bring the entire operation crashing down. Captain James Mackenzie carries 17 scars from Antietam to Appomattox, and every single one of them tells a story about paying attention to details. A minié ball that went through his shoulder at Fredericksburg because he didn't notice a sniper's position. A saber cut across his ribs at Chancellorsville because he assumed an enemy soldier was dead when he wasn't. This is a man who's learned, through pain and blood, that survival depends on noticing what everyone else misses. And after the war, while other officers were drinking themselves into early graves or taking safe posts back east, Mackenzie did something unusual. He went west and decided to actually learn about the people he was fighting. For 6 years he's lived among Plains tribes, learning their languages with an academic's devotion, understanding their customs the way an anthropologist would study them. Except the word anthropologist barely exists yet, and Mackenzie's doing this because he believes knowing your enemy is the only way to stay alive. He speaks conversational Crow, decent Sioux, passable Cheyenne. He knows which tribes hold their pipes a certain way during ceremonies, which ones paint their faces with vertical lines versus horizontal, which ones consider it an insult to look someone directly in the eyes. This isn't casual knowledge. This is 6 years of immersion, and it's about to pay off in a way nobody expects. His suspicions begin with mathematics, which is appropriate because Mackenzie was a school teacher before the war. He starts keeping records, tracking which scouts guide which patrols and what happens to those patrols. And a pattern emerges that's statistically impossible to ignore. Patrols guided by certain scouts, including this Black Wolf character, suffer 40% higher casualties than average. 40%. That's not bad luck. That's not coincidence. That's enemy action disguised as misfortune. So Mackenzie starts watching more carefully, and that's when he notices the small things. Black Wolf holds his rifle with the thumb-forward grip that Sioux warriors use, not the thumb-back position of Crow marksmen. It's a tiny difference, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd spent years watching both peoples fight. The way Black Wolf walks changes slightly when he thinks nobody's watching, his gait shifting from mountain-style to plain-style movement. During a supply run, Mackenzie observes White Magpie eating with 4 fingers instead of 3 for just a moment before catching himself and switching. These aren't proof, these are suspicions. But Mackenzie's a patient man who stayed alive by being thorough. So he starts creating behavioral charts, noting patterns, building a case. Then he designs a trap so elegant, it's almost beautiful. It's October 15th. Frost covers the parade ground, and morning coffee steams in the officers' mess. Mackenzie's sitting there with several scouts, genuine Crow warriors he's known for months, plus Black Wolf and one other suspect. And Mackenzie starts talking about coffee, casual as anything, the way soldiers talk about food and women and home. He mentions that his Crow wife, and here's the brilliant part, he doesn't actually have a Crow wife, but he mentions that she taught him to love berry coffee, the traditional Crow way of preparing it. He asks each scout about their grandmother's recipe, what berries they use, how they roast the beans, making it sound like he's just homesick and nostalgic. The genuine Crow scouts laugh. They laugh because there's no such thing as crowberry coffee. The Crow prefer tea ceremonies with mint and bearberry. They've been drinking tea since before white people showed up with coffee beans. It's such a fundamental part of their culture that every actual Crow person knows this. But Swift Arrow, sitting there as Black Wolf, doesn't know. He only knows what he learned during his childhood captivity and what he's observed since infiltrating the fort. So when Mackenzie asks him about berry coffee, Swift Arrow sees an opportunity to prove his authenticity. He doesn't want to be the one scout who admits he doesn't know something cultural. So Swift Arrow starts describing, in elaborate detail, how his grandmother roasted coffee beans with chokecherries and buffalo berries. He explains the ratios. 2 parts chokecherries to 1 part buffalo berries, roasted until they turn dark and smell like smoke and sweetness. He even describes the sacred prayers spoken during preparation, making up a beautiful ceremony that sounds absolutely authentic if you don't know that it's completely fictional. The other scouts have stopped laughing. They're staring at him now, and Swift Arrow realizes something's wrong, but doesn't know what. And that moment of uncertainty shows on his face like a crack in ice. The silence that follows lasts 3 heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Mackenzie's hand moves to his Colt Navy revolver. And then everything explodes. Swift Arrow throws his coffee cup directly into Mackenzie's face, scalding hot liquid buying him maybe 2 seconds. White Magpie, sitting by the window, doesn't hesitate. He crashes through the glass. And you have to admire the commitment, because that's not a modern window with thin glass. That's thick frontier glass that could cut you to ribbons. Running Elk tries to follow, but a guard named Corporal Davies has a Spencer rifle and the reflexes of a man who's stayed alive through 4 years of combat. 1 shot, center mass, and Running Elk's dead before he hits the floor. Broken Wing and Silent Thunder make it to the powder magazine, and now the situation shifts from escape attempt to hostage standoff. They're inside a building containing enough gunpowder to level half the fort. They're not making empty threats. If they light that powder, 200 soldiers die along with them, plus every Crow Scout, plus anyone unlucky enough to be within 100 yards. It's mutually assured destruction in a pine board building on the Montana frontier. The standoff lasts 13 hours. 13 hours of negotiation attempts, of officers trying to talk them down, of Broken Wing and Silent Thunder, knowing they're already dead men just trying to buy time for Swift Arrow and White Magpie to escape. They demand horses, supplies, safe passage, all the things they know they won't get. They tell their stories, explaining why they did this, justifying the deception, making sure someone knows that they weren't betraying honor. They were serving it in the only way left to them. Some of the soldiers listening probably understand. Some probably respect it even as they prepare to kill them. The end comes from 300 yards away. Sergeant Muller is a sharpshooter who learned his trade during the war. One of those men who can calculate wind, distance, and drop so precisely that he makes impossible shots look routine. He's been watching the powder magazine through a telescopic sight, waiting for an opening. And when Silent Thunder moves near a window for just a moment, Muller takes the shot. 50 caliber bullet through the eye, and Silent Thunder drops without knowing he's been hit. Broken Wing realizes he's alone, realizes the standoff is over, and makes a choice. He walks out singing his death song, not in Crow but in Sioux, his true identity revealed in his final moments of life. They execute him in the parade ground while the entire garrison watches. But he dies with his own name, his own language, his own identity restored. There's something both tragic and triumphant about that. He lived as the enemy for months, but he died as himself. Swift Arrow and White Magpie are gone, vanished into an October blizzard that hits the valley like divine intervention. They leave blood trails that reach the Yellowstone River and then disappear. Search parties find nothing. Some soldiers swear they drowned. Others believe they made it home. The truth is, nobody knows for certain in that moment, and the uncertainty is almost worse than knowing. Because now the question facing everyone at Fort Ellis is this: how many other infiltrators are out there? How many trusted scouts are actually enemies? How can you ever trust anyone again? The exposure triggers immediate catastrophe, and what happens next is exactly what you'd expect from an organization that's just discovered it's been infiltrated. General Alfred Terry, commander of the Department of Dakota, orders all native scouts detained for interrogation. Not just the suspicious ones, all of them. 60 Crow Scouts who've been serving faithfully, who've risked their lives guiding patrols, who fought beside soldiers and bled for the army, suddenly find themselves under armed guard, being questioned like criminals. And among them is a man named Takes Many Horses, and his story deserves special attention. Takes Many Horses guided Custer. He was one of the Crow Scouts at Little Bighorn, who watched the 7th Cavalry ride to destruction while he and the other scouts tried to warn them, tried to explain that attacking that village was suicide. He lost 2 brothers at Little Bighorn, both of them fighting alongside white soldiers against their traditional Sioux enemies. This man has given everything to the alliance with the army, and now he's being accused of potentially being a spy because Swift Arrow and his team fooled everyone so completely that nobody knows who to trust anymore. 3 scouts are hanged at dawn on October 20th. 3 men who were probably innocent, executed based on suspicion and paranoia and the military's desperate need to appear decisive. Their death songs mix Crow prayers with pleas of innocence that fall on deaf ears, and you have to wonder what the soldiers watching that execution are thinking. Are they convinced they're executing traitors? Or do some of them understand they're watching innocent men die because the system failed to catch the real infiltrators in time? The trust between military and native scouts shatters like river ice in spring. It doesn't crack. It doesn't bend. It shatters into fragments that can never be properly reassembled. Colonel Brennan cancels the 3-column campaign that the infiltrators discovered and reported. 1,800 soldiers who would have marched north in coordinated columns now stay in their forts because nobody trusts the intelligence network anymore. But cancel doesn't mean peaceful. Instead, Brennan orders punitive expeditions, those vicious raids where frustrated soldiers take out their anger on whoever they can find. 4 Sioux villages get burned over the next 2 months. One of them contains only women and children gathering winter food because the warriors are out hunting. 27 people die in that raid, and not one of them was involved in the infiltration operation. This is how violence ripples outward from a single deception. Swift Arrow reaches Red Hawk's camp after 7 days of traveling at night, moving only when the moon is dark, hiding during daylight, drinking from streams and eating raw meat because fires would give away his position. Frostbite claims 3 fingers on his left hand and his left ear. White Magpie arrives 2 days later, having lost 4 toes. They're alive, but they're broken, and the intelligence network they were part of is destroyed. 500 warriors who depended on military information for survival now fight blind. The advantage is gone. The edge that made ambushes like Willow Creek possible has been blunted. Red Hawk faces judgment from the tribal council, and this is where the story gets philosophically complex. Half the council argues he risks sacred honor through deception, that wearing the face of the enemy and lying every day violated fundamental principles that separate humans from animals. The other half argues that desperate times demanded desperate measures, that when you're facing extermination, you use whatever weapons are available. There's no easy answer. Red Hawk sits in that council lodge, listening to warriors debate whether he's a hero or a traitor, and the truth is probably that he's both. The extended conflict costs everyone dearly. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. 500 additional soldiers die over the next 2 winters, men who would have survived if the war had ended in negotiation when it could have. 2,000 natives perish from starvation and bullets during the prolonged resistance. 2,000! Think about that number. 2,000 people who had names, families, children, dreams, stories, all dead because trust broke down, because one successful infiltration made cooperation impossible, because violence became the only language anyone could speak. Now jump forward 51 years. It's 1927, and we're at the reservation school at Pine Ridge. There are 68 students sitting in a classroom that smells like chalk dust and government-issued textbooks. Among them is Samuel Swift Arrow Jr., grandson of the infiltrator, sitting beside Mary Takes Many Horses, granddaughter of the executed Crow Scout. They don't know their shared history. How could they? Their teacher is an Irish immigrant named Patrick O'Brien, who knows nothing about the wars their grandparents fought. He's teaching them English words for concepts their languages express more elegantly, teaching them to forget the old ways and embrace civilization as the government defines it. But outside the classroom, old Swift Arrow is still alive, 73 winters old now, teaching traditional beadwork despite government prohibition, keeping the old ways alive through quiet resistance. His three-fingered left hand works the beads with practiced precision, creating patterns that tell stories without words. And when students ask him about his missing fingers, about the scars, about the stories, he tells them the truth. He explains how wearing an enemy's face taught him something the young warriors never understood. All warriors bleed the same color. All warriors dream the same dreams of home, of family, of children playing in summer sun. All warriors fear the same silence when bullets fly, and you don't know if the next sound will be your own death. He tells them about sitting in the officers' mess at Fort Ellis, pretending to be Crow, listening to genuine Crow Scouts tell stories about their families, and realizing those stories sounded exactly like Sioux stories. Different names, different places, same love. He tells young Samuel and young Mary, grandson and granddaughter of men on opposite sides of a war, that their grandfathers were both brave, both loyal, both convinced they were doing the right thing. Takes many horses believed in the alliance with the army because he thought it was the best way to protect his people from complete destruction. Swift Arrow believed in deception and resistance because he thought it was the only way to maintain freedom and dignity. Neither man was wrong. Neither man was right. They were both just trying to survive in a world that gave them impossible choices. The old man's voice gets quiet when he reaches the end of the story, and he tells them something that probably isn't in any government-approved curriculum. He says that the difference between enemies and relatives is sometimes just circumstance, just which side of an invisible line you happen to be born on. He says that his greatest act of bravery wasn't infiltrating Fort Ellis or surviving the blizzard escape. It was learning to forgive himself for the men he killed while wearing a false face, and learning to honor the enemy scouts who were just trying to protect their families the same way he was trying to protect his. Samuel and Mary sit there listening. Two children who should be enemies based on their family history, and instead they're friends who share candy and help each other with homework. And maybe that's the real ending to this story. Not the battles or the betrayals, not the heroism or the tragedy, but two children who don't inherit their grandparents' hatred because one old warrior was brave enough to tell the complicated truth instead of the simple lie. The great Plains Wars ended with reservations and broken treaties, with cultures almost destroyed and languages almost forgotten. But they also ended with survivors who chose to teach forgiveness instead of vengeance, who understood that carrying generational hatred forward just means more children grow up to bleed. Old Swift Arrow died in 1932, 5 years after this classroom scene, and at his funeral, both Sioux and Crow came to honor him. The man who once deceived Crow warriors to kill them was mourned by their descendants. And that transformation, from infiltrator to peacemaker, from warrior to teacher, might be the most remarkable infiltration of all. He infiltrated the cycle of violence itself and planted seeds of understanding that grew after he was gone. That's the story. Blood feuds and sacred deceptions, coffee traps and powder magazine standoffs, but ultimately, a story about how enemies can become teachers and how the bravest thing a warrior can do is choose a different kind of battle. The kind fought with truth instead of deception, with understanding instead of violence, with hope that the next generation might find better answers than the ones we settled for.